Hey everybody, my name is Emily Paige Wilson, and I am really excited to be able to share my Authortube Newbie tag. I'm going to answer the original questions created by Jenna Streety in her Authortube tag. The first of which was, how did you find out about YouTube? And y'all, I don't know for sure, but I would be remiss if I didn't guess Kate Kavanaugh. I don't really know how I started down the rabbit hole of BookTube and AuthorTube, but I watch this content a lot, and primarily my writing experience has been as a traditionally published poet. But more recently, in the last 3 years, I've started writing novels in verse for young adults. So I thought that maybe it was time to kind of be more active and be more vocal in this community, the AuthorTube community. But I have a feeling if I were to trace back to what I originally started watching, I would not be surprised if it was Kate Kavanaugh's content. She's just so warm and creative and informative, and her content would probably also be supplemented with Alexa Dunn. Incredibly informative and insightful information coming from Alexa's channel. So while I can't pinpoint specifically my introduction to AuthorTube, I really wouldn't be surprised if it was Kate. So as I mentioned before, I primarily write in poetry, but I also have started writing for young adults, particularly novels in verse. So with poetry, which is something that I've been writing since I was 5, we'll talk about that a little bit later on, writing poetry. But I do have 2 chapbooks published. One is entitled I'll Build Us a Home, that came out from Finishing Line Press in 2018. My second book just came out last fall, which I'm really excited about, my second chapbook. And for those of you who might not be familiar with the term, chapbook is just about half the size of a regular full-length volume of poetry. So my second chapbook is entitled Hypochondria, Least Powerful of the Greek Gods. It came out with Glass Poetry Press. I think I have praised them very thoroughly in my other videos, but they're a really fantastic press. It also meant a lot to me that chapbook came out during COVID, when I think a lot of us were experiencing heightened anxiety in general, but also specifically health anxiety. So that collection follows a fictitious character named Hypochondria, who is a Greek goddess, but she's not very powerful, and she resents that. And that narrative is threaded with my own personal experience following some medical mishaps that led to a really severe bout of anxiety. And then my full-length debut collection of poems, which is about 10 years in the making, y'all. And we're working on mock covers, and I cannot wait to show you because the cover, it's simplistic, it's elegant, it's really meaningful to me. That collection is entitled Newbie, and it's about my Czech heritage. It's about being able to go spend time in Prague and trying to find the small farming village where my great-great-grandparents immigrated from. It's about translation and language theory. That is forthcoming spring 2022 on Unsolicited Press, which is a small press outside of Portland. So primarily I've just written in, I've written in poetry, and recently, in the last 3 years, I've started writing young adult novels in verse. I am on submission with my first one now, and I pitched that as a modern retelling of Harriet the Spy, told in the style of the poet X, set in South Carolina during hurricane season. So I'm on submission with that, and I am currently working on my second novel in verse for young adult readers. So in both poetry and novels in verse, I tend to write first-person present tense. That was something that my agent suggested, at least specifically for young adults. The present tense provides a much more immediate and sometimes emotionally packed vessel through which to tell a story. So typically, first-person, present tense. Unless I'm writing those hypochondria poems, I treat her in third person because it's a little bit easier for me to distance myself from the theme of health anxiety. I can write about it a little bit more freely if I'm not writing specifically centered on my own experience. To the fourth question, I am definitely a plotter. As a Capricorn, probably shouldn't surprise anyone. I do like routine and structure, but I also find that there's a lot of liberation in structure as well. I think the same is true for poetry. I think when we start bringing in things like form and we start bringing in, meter or rhyme scheme, those can feel like restrictions. But I think a lot of times in our real life too, I think if you practice yoga, you'll probably recognize this philosophy. A lot of times constrictions really will allow you to think creatively, right? It's a boundary you have to think around or over or through. And for me, sometimes it's easier to generate creative ideas within that set of confines. So I really do like Save the Cat. I used that beat sheet for my first novel in verse. I'm using it for my second. Um, Although I should preface by saying I did try to write a young adult novel in verse without plotting. It did not go very well. Uh, it was bad. I'll just admit it. It was bad. That being said, just because this approach works for me, I definitely don't think that it has to work for everyone, right? This is just descriptive of my own process. I find plotting really helpful. To me, it's something I'm always negotiating with. Y'all will see that in my writing vlogs. I'm always kind of moving my post-it notes around on my corkboard to make sure I'm moving the plot forward, but it's not prescriptive. I don't think we all write the same, and I don't think that we have to. And I really enjoy watching the content of people who are pantsers or plantsers. I really just appreciate being able to get a myriad of writing experiences. Being exposed to those, I think, is really interesting. For me, though, we'll probably move forward plotting. So I addressed question 5 a little bit in my earlier responses. I am traditionally published in terms of the poetry world, Finishing Line Press, Glass Poetry Press, and Unsolicited Press forthcoming, and I am yet to be published in the YA world. Hopefully, that will be coming up soon. I think that's part of the reason that I wanted to start making videos, is because I feel like I'm on the precipice of really exciting things moving forward in that direction of my career in the YA space, and I wanted to be able to share it with you guys. I wanted to be more of a vocal participant in this community as well, because I really love seeing other people's stories and successes, and so to be able to share mine in this space and to be able to get to make exciting announcements like showing y'all the cover of my new poetry collection, or one day being able to announce a book deal. I really want to start building community now so that we can celebrate those milestones together. Currently, I am represented by Amy Joan Paquette. She came to me kind of like a literary fairy godmother. I do have it on the books to do a How I Got My Agent video. It definitely feels like a Cinderella story to me. Took a lot of hard work, took about 3 years, but it was a really amazing experience, and she represents me through the Erin Murphy Literary Agency. So on this channel, what I would love for it to be, and of course some of this is going to be organic, some of this is going to be experimentation, but what I'm envisioning for this channel is to have it be a bridge between traditional YA Authortube and then also incorporating videos that are more traditionally poetry focused. And a lot of times poetry is in the form of indie presses or through academic presses. I think that the YA community and BookTube have really grown, and they have a really solid community in the way that I think poetry, the scope of the poetry community on YouTube, feels slightly smaller to me. Correct me if I'm wrong, please, because I know that there's room for me to continue to explore and to learn about new creators. But what I would really love to do is to create a bridge between those two different spheres. And so I would love to do traditional writing vlogs. I just think that those are so much fun to watch. Things like How I Got My Agent. But I would also love to do more poetry-centered videos as well. Y'all have already seen that I've started to upload readings of poems. I think every time I have a poem that's published in a journal, whether that's print or online, I'm going to give y'all a little bit of a behind-the-scenes video. They'll probably be shorter, but I'll read the video out loud. I'll read the poem out loud on video so that y'all can listen to it if you prefer to hear poems read out loud as opposed to reading them. Maybe give y'all a little bit of background information about why and how I wrote those poems. I would also love to see if I can translate poetry prompts or poetry workshops into a visual platform as well. Something I've been thinking about a lot during COVID, and also since having left the teaching sphere, is how do I still become involved in the community through those interests of mine and through that skill set. And sometimes it was going to public libraries and doing free workshops to the public, but since those avenues aren't as readily available, it feels really important to me, and I'm really appreciative of the opportunity to be able to see if I can translate those experiences through video. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about. Probably book hauls here and there as well. I really do like to support indie presses, even though I've mentioned in my first one, I feel a little bit of tension between trying to practice eco-minimalism and then also hauling books. But if you are going to spend your money, I think supporting small presses and independent artists is a great way to spend your money. We live in a pretty tiny duplex, I think I've mentioned that before. Do we have the bookshelf space for more hauls? You know, we're going to make it work, my friends. And then you can always pay it forward and donate books that you've read to other people. So, full circle. So like I mentioned, I first started writing, and I think I used air quotes earlier. It was still writing, but I definitely remember writing poems when I was 5. And I had teachers, including my mom. My mom is an elementary school teacher, who, bless their hearts, were so kind and encouraging. I had really, really fabulous teachers all throughout my life, even though I grew up in a under-resourced schooling district. I had really fabulous teachers who definitely encouraged the artistic pursuits of their students, and my mom was really supportive. So, I mean, yeah, at her house, are there poems that 5-year-old Emily wrote? Things like, you know, the cat sat on the mat, illustrated in crayon on yellow construction paper. Yeah, you know, it's there. When I, my parents live in North Carolina, where I was born and raised. I'm currently living in Washington State. When it's finally safe to travel, if I can pull that out of the archives, you know, maybe I will see. I don't know if I'm that brave, but I've been writing pretty much ever since I could remember. I had a wonderful librarian too, Miss Barbara. So I've just been really, really fortunate to have so many people support reading and writing, and I just haven't stopped since then. That explanation kind of answers question 9. I don't particularly write short stories, unless, of course, you count my young adult novels. So really, I think, honest to goodness, y'all, I think the first poem I ever wrote was, you know, the cat sat on the mat. Genius. Literary genius. Peaking early, right? So number 10 is a great question. What authors have inspired you the most? Again, I'm primarily thinking of poets, and I'm probably going to make a video on my favorite poetry collections. But as a teaser, Rita Dove is incredibly important. The cover for Newbie, my full-length poetry collection, to me is a visual homage in a lot of ways to one of Dove's collections, Thomas and Beulah. I'm so excited about that. Sylvia Plath was very important when I was growing up. And then in college, I studied under the poet Kazim Ali, and so not only was his work really paramount in my own development early on, but he also introduced me to his press, Nightboat Books. And when I tell y'all all of my favorite books come from Nightboat Books, I know I said in my other video, Black Lawrence Press is my favorite press, which is true. I guess I have 2 favorites. That's allowed, right? That's allowed. So, Nightboat Books is fantastic. Banu Kapil, I think her work is absolutely amazing. Brandon Som, Michael Burkhardt, Sabrina Oren Mark, I think is fantastic. She does a series of like fairy tale retellings, I think on the Paris Review. Let me check. She writes for the Paris Review, and she has a series called Happily, which I think is just pretty much brilliant, honestly. I think the world of her and her writing. So that's a quick, brief overview of the poets who have been the most important to me in helping me explore and solidify my voice early on. So I definitely do not schedule my writing sessions. I think you'll see in my writing vlogs that even though I work an 8 to 5 with a lunch break in between, my evenings can be a little bit scattered in terms of flexing time and then working late based on various engagements that we have. I work for a university. And so a lot of times if there's a club or guest speaker event, I'm flexing the time. Typically, I try to work after 5, like right after work. I try to just hurry up and get that time in before I get too exhausted. However, y'all, I mean, it could be, trying to squeeze it in on my lunch break or flexing the time if I know I'm going to stay later. So I write a little bit earlier in the afternoon. On the weekends, it's usually in the morning. I like to get a cup of coffee, decaf. I switched to decaf recently. Your girl turned 30 and, we're making some changes. It was a hard battle to get here, but drink some decaffeinated coffee. I love to try to read for about an hour or so, do some meditation, and then get straight to writing. So I guess actually, typically, maybe I lied a little bit. Typically there is kind of a loose schedule, right? Monday through Friday, try to do it after work around 5 o'clock. Weekends, do it in the morning. But I allow for a lot of flexibility. Balance is also really important to me too. So I'm always trying to think about how I can make sure that my days are full of, reading, writing, some type of exercising. Lord knows, you gotta keep your house clean, trying to meal prep. That's not even a social life, y'all. I have like the least social life of a Leo moon. I mean, I know COVID has put some restrictions in, but just trying to keep everything in balance and realizing that if you're going to sustain the writing life for as long as possible, you've got to be flexible. So, the penultimate question, how do you write? I used to write only by hand. And I would write by hand. Y'all know, if you watch my writing blogs, when I'm working on my young adult novels in verse, I typically only strive for about 200 words a day because I'm working in pretty small vignettes. And then just using voice and narrative structure to move a plot forward. So I really try to be as condensed and as imagery focused and as lyrically forward with my language as possible. So I would write by hand, and then at the end of the week what I would do is I would go back to my laptop and then I would type up the week's worth of words, which was very helpful for me because not only I don't edit while I write, but what I do is I would write for the day. The next day I would come back. Before I started my writing, I'd read what I had written the day before, and then I'd start to write. And then at the end of the week, I could go back through and read everything I'd written for the week to make sure that the voice was consistent, to make sure the plot was moving forward. And it took a bit more time, but it felt very integral to the writing process. That being said, I was also working on, I think my laptop was like 10 years old, I think. I recently upgraded. My laptop, bless its heart, it was trying to do the Lord's work. It was not succeeding. It was 10 years old. I was so proud of it because I paid for it full on my own. I won a writing contest in college and I bought this new laptop and I was so excited. And it couldn't hold up. It tried to live a good life. It failed. It would take me 36 minutes to restart this computer, y'all. Like, it took 36 minutes if the computer needed to restart from the time I turned it on to the time I could open a Word document. So, I recently upgraded to a Mac. Never owned a Mac before. I feel very fancy. Not used to, it was quite a splurge for me. It took a lot of convincing. It runs beautifully. So now it is much more fluid to work on the computer as I write. Will I go back to writing by hand? I don't know. I miss it. I do actually really miss it. I worry about how much screen time I spend. I think a lot of people are in that camp. That's also a potential video idea. Practicing mindfulness and digital minimalism while also being on YouTube, I think could be an interesting topic of conversation. Or if you know somebody who's done a video on that, leave it linked down below. I would love to check it out. But I have only recently switched to just typing on my computer as I write. And the final question is, what are you most excited about now that you're a part of Authortube? I know it might be a cliche, but I think it really just is community building. I'm excited to be able to be a more vocal part of the community. I've been a silent audience member for quite a while, but to feel more emboldened to like comment and celebrate on people's success, and to also be able to share with you guys my milestones, because I do really feel like there are some good things forthcoming that I cannot wait to be able to share with you. I'm also excited about just having more agency in what I can share, especially in terms of the traditional poetry world, right? A lot of times when a poem gets printed, either online or actually in a print journal, it's exciting when it comes out, but then you don't know how long people are going to have access to that. And so I think to be able to record poetry, to be able to record poetry workshops, and to share prompts is going to make that work a lot more accessible, and it's going to make me feel like I have a lot more agency. So, yeah, community, celebrating milestones, and just being able to talk about poetry, whether that's, straight verse, whether that's novels in verse. I'm really looking forward to being able to share all that. So if you are new to Authortube and you have recently done this tag, please leave it down below. I would definitely love to hear about that, or to check it out, to watch your video. If you also remember the first story or poem that you've ever written, I would love to hear about that in the comments. It's one of my favorite questions, and I think it's just delightful, the first stories or poems that we've crafted and how we remember them. So thank you guys so much for hanging out. I appreciate it. I hope you guys have a good day.